Welcome to the History in 60 podcast, a companion series to AMI's History in 60, hosted by John Loeppky, exploring powerful moments in Canada's disability history. Here in the podcast, we take a deeper dive through conversations with guests who are shaping disability culture and history today.
When we talk about politics, we often talk about power, representation, and who gets to make decisions. But for much of Canadian history, disabled people were excluded from political spaces via inaccessible buildings, by assumption about capacity, and by systems that were never designed with disability in mind. Our guest today is Dr. Levesque, a professor of Canadian politics and public policy in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Mount Allison University. His work examines how institutional arrangements and governance structures shape public policy outcomes, including the barriers and opportunities that people with disabilities encounter when engaging with political systems and seeking elected office. Thanks so much for joining us on the History in 60 Companion Podcast. Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John. Actually, it's a pleasure to be here. For those that may be wondering and are unable to see me directly, I'm a middle-aged man, graying here, salt and pepper here, a short beard as well, and I'm wearing a black sweater with a white shirt.
And I'm here in our podcast studio here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I am wearing a green shirt. I have a somewhat manicured beard here on Treaty 6 in Saskatoon. Professor Levesque, your academic subject areas focus heavily on disability. How did you end up choosing this area of academia to focus your life on?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because I started out in the private sector for many years, and then about 20 years in, I decided to come back to get my PhD. And so I went and got my PhD at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and I did it in public policy and public administration. So what I'm curious about here is, why is it, for example, that you can work with government and make progress on some issues, and at other times you try working with them and you're just absolutely frustrated because they just won't pay attention or listen to you or anything else, and they do anything but what you believe is would make a meaningful difference in people's lives. So that just puzzled me. So I decided to go back to get my PhD to study public policy at McMaster, because most people that study disability study it from a critical disability lens or from a social work perspective. But in political science, there's only like 2 or 3 of us across Canada, which is hardly any people. And that struck me as interesting. And then the other dynamic was when I was in junior high school in Toronto. So I did my high school in Toronto, and that was grades 7 and 8. One of my best friends actually had a disability, but I remember him though because he was one of my friends and our school was not accessible at all. So he had a hard time with accessibility issues. And I remember as myself and other people would sometimes help him up the stairs, carry him on our piggyback or whatnot. And as buddies and friends, you just do whatever you can. You don't see the disability, you see your friend, right? And so that always struck me, and I was left with that. So when I came across the fact that there was very little studied or known from a political science perspective on disability, was like, aha, this is the second area of research for me.
So the episode of the TV show History in 60 that this podcast is a companion to is about disabled politicians and sort of the growth of disabled politicians, not just from sort of, if we look at post-war era, governor generals, prime ministers of Canada, things like that, who had disabilities but maybe didn't identify as such. And in that episode, we looked at and in the research for that episode, I came across some of your work leading up to 2016, the relative lack of candidates in the lead up to 2016, looking at, was it 3 or 4 provincial cycles? I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that project and coming up to your findings and where your work has gone on since looking at that, the reality of why we do or don't see disabled political candidates who identify publicly.
Sure. There's 2 parts to that, John. First part is I had a student at Mount Allison here where I'm located, and she was super interested in issues of disability, and she knew I had a research agenda on issues of disability. And so we worked together to do a project that she wanted to do, and I guided her through it. But I said, and her question was, she wanted to kind of be interested in, does it, does it matter if we elect people with disabilities? Was her question. Or is someone just giving a token representation by saying, okay, we need one disabled person. Okay, so we have to have one in our group and so on. But it's substantively, does it really matter when it comes down to making policies? As we were working through that research together, I said to her, we also have to gauge some level of, or get to know how many people are actually elected that do have a disability. That led to us backing up a step and taking a look at this bigger question. So what we did, or what I did actually in that piece, is taking a look at 4 election cycles across all provinces in Canada. And I focus on the provincial level because I find provinces are much more interesting than the federal government, myself, in a lot of ways, because they experiment more with different types of policies than the federal government does. And then after a number of years, the federal government steals their good ideas, right? That's what tends to happen a lot of times. So in this perspective here, what I found is the fact that on the voting side, we've made more progress. So, for example, we know, for example, that people with disabilities vote at a lower rate than people without disabilities, 26, 27, 28% lower rate. So we need to address that. One of the ways that elections bodies have addressed this is to make the voting experience more accessible. So that means either bringing the ballot out to them, okay, at specific locations, or making where we vote more accessible, having alternative ballots, different mail-in ballots, different options. And now we're looking at online options as well. So that's improved. But the flip side to that is, so that's the voting experience. The flip side to that is the candidates. How many candidates do we have that actually, people that say, I want to seek political office. I want to become an MP or an MLA or an MPP. And so in doing this, we scoured the public databases through Google and we scoured all the elections data from the elections bodies in each province and everything else. And then we turned around and correlated that with people's pictures, images, and any historical data that we could find that was written up on all these candidates. And we found that there are very few people that we could identify having a disability. So our sample could only take we found that there were less than 0.01% of candidates, not people that were elected here, but just candidates. So very, very few candidates ever let their name stand for political office. So that's not good. So we can do better here. Part of the issues in there was, why is this so? Could be that people don't know that this is a field that they can aspire to and become. And part of that is they need role models. So people that have actually gotten elected as well. Okay. So it's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing in some ways. But in this process, then it's like, okay, so I started doing interviews with people that had considered it and people that were politicians with a disability. And some people told me that they had considered becoming a candidate, but they had learned of someone that had lost their disability benefits for doing so. And I said, how's that possible? And they said, they lost their benefits from their insurance and stuff, because they said, if you can go out and canvass to get people to vote for you, they said, then you're well enough to get a job. Therefore, you lose your benefits. And that is so short-sighted.
I know this is a problem they've had in the States as well, where obviously your health care is not that it's not a barrier here. To be very clear, it is a very significant barrier for a lot of disabled folks here. It has a different tinge to it in the States, and I know they've bumped into that with trying to get people to run as disabled candidates.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, to my thinking here, and right now I've got a project that I'm ready to start working on, and I want to take a look at this more, because the way that I would see it is that if the person's benefits should not be cut off, okay, because they are canvassing to become a politician, to get elected. However, if the benefits need to be readjusted, they could be, but I would say that insurance companies and other bodies should do it if they get elected, because then they have a paycheck coming in from being an elected politician. Then maybe that needs to be revisited at that time. But to me, going and canvassing to become elected is like somebody that is laid off from work and looking for work, but they get employment insurance, right? We don't cut off people's employment insurance when they're looking for work, right? They still get it. So why do we do this for people that are that have a disability? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't square up to me.
You've looked at the province, and I know that you've also looked at particularly like disability policy when it comes to the Trudeau Liberals and things like that. How do you see this filtering down into these sort of municipal. So if we step down from provincial politics, the sort of Sackville City Council, I don't know, to pick on where you are.
Yep.
Like, how do you see that filtering down into those sort of more localized elections, even if it's just anecdotally?
Yeah, there's no research on that in Canada, and because local politics is like the Wild West of politics. It's there's so many town councils out there that it's really challenging to try to gather enough data. But in Sackville, New Brunswick, one of our town councillors does have a disability, actually. It's Bruce Finney, and he's been on council for many years, and so it is interesting, that dynamic. I think everything applies to town council for sure, except that town councils can be more accessible for people to first get there. And by accessible, I don't necessarily mean physical accessibility here, but I mean it's an easier entry point to get involved in politics than it is at the provincial or federal level overall, because it's local, it's a smaller geographical size. You would know more people locally easier in here. So for people to want to learn about politics, it's often a really good training ground for a few years, and then afterwards move to provincial politics or federal politics if you want to. So I think the local town councils and local politics plays a huge role. One of the biggest barriers for us in here is physical accessibility of buildings, John. People can't get in the building. Like take a look at Mount Allison, where I work. My building that I'm in, it's 4 floors. Accessible washrooms are on the 4th. Okay, there's no elevator in the building. A few years ago, I had someone come and see me who I had known for a long time, but I'd never met the person in person. Well, I didn't know he was in a wheelchair. He was paraplegic. And so he shows up for a meeting with me at my place of work at the university, and someone says, yeah, Dr. Levesque, there's someone downstairs for you. And I said, well, please just show him where my office is. I've got to go grab a document. And they go, well, he can't. He's in a wheelchair. And it was like, how embarrassing for me. My place of work is not even accessible for people. So I went down quickly and I met him and stuff. And I said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. And we found an alternative place to meet and things like that. But changing accessibility to buildings is very, very hard. And most people don't want to do it. They say it's too costly, number one. Well, I think it makes you money. I mean, wouldn't you want to be known as the most accessible educational facility in Canada, the most accessible university in Canada, right? I mean, to have it fully accessible, to me, that's fantastic.
In the episode, we looked at the Moet entrance at the Victoria legislature. And one of the folks we talked to is Keith Jorgensen, who's a Saskatchewan MLA, who talks about having dyslexia in the episode. I'm curious, with physical accessibility is one part of it, but how do you see the lack of inclusion or the lack of candidates of folks who may well have a disability that they've never declared and is, as the community often calls it, invisible or certainly less visible than, a cane or a guide dog or a wheelchair?
It's huge, actually, and trying to get numbers on that and to help break down those barriers is probably the bigger challenge overall. I've had people come up to me that say that they are an elected politician, okay? They've been successful in their role, but they've told me that they've never disclosed their disability to their political party or any other place of work for fear that they won't get promoted to cabinet or won't get promoted to other choice positions or sit on specific committees that they're super interested in. This individual had an invisible disability. And I've known other ones that have made similar comments to me and revealed that to me. I can't use their names because they want to remain anonymous. It's a huge, huge problem. They're not even on the radar, I would say, right now. As a society, biggest struggle is the fact that we're not even recognizing these individuals is what it is. And we need to break down those barriers.
You mentioned the need for mentors or people to see people in the public eye. This episode on disabled politicians, we looked at folks like David Onley, former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, which, while not an elected post, is a real touchstone for people in the political sphere who are disabled. Talk to folks like Stephanie Cadieux and Michelle Stilwell, whose political lives are heavily connected together. Can you talk to me a little bit about the value of having those folks who have been there and done that and reached high political office in these extremely visible ways? I mean, one of those folks was a Paralympian at the same time as being an elected official, which, as a former parasport athlete, I still can't quite comprehend.
Pretty phenomenal people. And then I just didn't mention a couple more. I would mention Carla Qualtrough, actually, who just retired from active political life. She did a lot of work as well. And even sometimes people that don't have a disability themselves, but have have a son or a daughter that has a disability. And here, I'm thinking about the late finance minister for the Progressive Conservatives under Stephen Harper, Jim Flaherty. He had one of his children had a disability, actually. And so, and people, a lot of people I know hate Stephen Harper because he said he cut the budget to all kinds of things like that. But if you ever take a look at his budgets very closely, he never cut anything to people for people with disabilities. And that's because Jim Flaherty was there. And he was saying, no, we're not cutting these items that affect these individuals. And they actually added in and brought in the disability savings plan and a couple of other things, tax measures. So I think
RDSP.
These things are huge. This goes to a piece of research that student of mine I mentioned earlier, Bryn Langford, actually. She's in British Columbia herself, works at the Accessibility Directorate of the government right now. She and I decided to take a look at this. So the piece is called, I believe, The Symbolic Relevance of People with Disabilities. A British Columbia case study. So we took a look at whether electing people with disabilities made a difference. So Michelle Stilwell, Stephanie Cadieux was there, Sam, I forget his last name, former mayor of Vancouver. Sullivan, that's it, yes. They were successful. And in speaking with them and others, actually, we were able to see that it does matter to have them there. Symbolically, yes, it definitely matters. They have to be seen. They have to be there. But just because you're disabled, though, first off, and I should just let people know, it doesn't mean you're only going to be there to advocate on issues of disability. I mean, maybe you're interested instead on issues of the environment or international trade or something else, okay? People make that assumption. It's not necessarily, I would caution people from making that assumption myself. But our politicians, though, such as the ones you note, super individuals. We need them there because they do break down the barriers symbolically. Substantively, though, it's a mixed, though, how much of an influence that they can have, because at the end of the day, what the research found, when it comes down to it, progress gets thwarted sometimes because of political party politics. Okay, so let me give you a really good example here at the federal level that we just had with Justin Trudeau. So the Canadian Disability Benefit, you and your listeners are probably familiar with that. It's been in the news like crazy. It's $200 per month if someone qualifies. Now, under Justin Trudeau, he made a commitment to want to lift people with disabilities out of deep poverty. A fantastic goal to do. They did 2-3 years of consultations and studies on all of this, and they knew it was going to cost a lot of money, okay? Like $10 billion a year if they were going to do this. And what they were looking for, what came back was that we needed to have a disability benefit on a monthly basis of about $2,200. And we got $200 instead, right? And so they knew it was expensive. Okay, but everybody accepted it. We're finally doing this in here. They tried in the early 2000s and it failed once they found out all the costs and everything else. Justin Trudeau's government was committed to it. Everything was going for it. Even 2 weeks before the announcement. Okay, they were still there, but it wasn't 2,200. It was around 1,800 at that time. Okay, still good. So what happened from them going to $200? Well, what happened is this. Here's the backstory. Is that at the same time they were looking at this proposal, they were also looking at the proposal of the universal dental plan for low-income Canadians, and that was around $10 billion a year too. And so the Trudeau government was a minority government at the time, and so what they did is they went back to their cabinet and said, here's the two proposals in here. What do we want? They discussed it in cabinet, and cabinets contacted some of their own people in different ridings across Canada. And what came back for cabinet here very quickly was that going with the dental plan was the better one, simply because from a political calculation, the NDP would support it and maintain the government in power.
Right.
But then they had to give something for people with disabilities, because if they gave them zero after all that work, people would be super upset. So they said, well, we'll set that at $200 and maybe we can increase it over time.
And then you have the problem challenge with the Canadian Disability Benefit. Don't worry, I won't massively turn this into like a one individual policy discussion, but you have this challenge of, when it comes to the disability benefit, how each province was going to decide, like, do you live in a world, we didn't end up in that world, but do you end up in a world where every province decides to claw it back? Most of the provinces decided not to claw it back. But I have a question around this, because you've brought up a really interesting piece of Canadian disability history. Is there a part of Canadian disability history, doesn't have to be in politics, that you wish we talked more about?
Yeah, actually, there's two things to that. I'm very much a reality-focused person, and I don't think that people get, in overall, as a general statement, the credit for the great work that they do. Most people don't get enough credit for all the good things they do, and that's a problem, I think, because without that, it makes it hard for people to keep going sometimes. They need incentive, and just even getting a pat on the back, getting a limelight or something else like that. I mean, this is important in here. I mean, why don't we have the Governor General of Canada Disability Awards or Leadership and Disability Awards or something else like that? I mean, we should have that. Okay, it should be there, but we don't. So for me, one thing that I would love to see more of are people's individual histories with disability, their stories. Myself, I don't have a disability myself, but I consider myself an ally of the disability community. The issues that I study are issues that people have brought to me and say, we need some work on this. We don't have enough information on this. So I will do my best I can and to do some research on this. Unfortunately, the academics and how academics work and how academic research work, it's a long-term thing. It's slow in terms of process, like molasses, if you want to say.
I was going to say glacial, but
glacial,
we might
sure.
go into, given your previous research into environmental, that might lead us down a climate change track. So
yeah, you don't know about that. That's true, but it is a slow process. But so for me, I think that they need to tell their story. I love picking up a book, okay, and someone says, and it's about person so and so, and they're telling their story of what struggles they had, what the successes they had, and what they're doing, and why, and the relationships they formed over their life. With different people. I think that's one of the best ways to help inform decision makers overall and people, and to destigmatize disability around us. That's number one. Number two, we need to learn more about the deep poverty that exists with a lot of people with disabilities. And now I'm going way back to the poor laws, okay, in the Elizabethan time, and then some of the things that governments brought in to try to address changes to improve the situation, but haven't really worked. Okay, and to make sure that, and in doing so, my goal here would be to hold governments to account for the job that they're continually excluding a quarter to a third or more of our population from participating in the economy, from participating in school, from participating in sports, from doing a lot of things in here. And so we can do better. So I think we need to move those goalposts. So the more that we can learn about that, I think it'd be super, super important overall.
As we close up here, if people want to find more of your work, because as you said, you've done a bit of scholarship. I mean, I first came across your work with that 2016 piece, and you're publishing before and after that. So can you tell our listeners and viewers where to find you on the internet, and if there are any projects that you want to shout out of yourself and others that tie into this disability and politics in Canada space? Sure.
So for more information, they can go to my website. It's www.policychange.ca. So all lower caps, one no spaces or anything in there. And I'll say that again, www.policychange.ca. And on that site, you'll see a bit of a profile of some of my work on there, and you'll be able to learn more.
Thank you so much for your time, Professor.
With pleasure, John, anytime.
From inaccessible buildings to shifting public attitudes, disabled politicians have had to push for space, visibility, and legitimacy inside Canada's political systems. Their presence doesn't just change policy, it changes what we imagine leadership can look like.
Thank you for tuning in to the companion podcast for AMI's History in 60. Be sure to watch History in 60 on AMI TV and online at AMI+. Join us next time as we continue exploring disability history and culture in Canada. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, downloading, and sharing it with someone who might learn from these stories. Every listen and view helps amplify disability history and the voices shaping change today.